Okay, so get this right. South Korea, martial law, declared, like actually declared. And then just like that, poof, gone.
Yeah.
It's wild, right? So that's what we're going to try and get to the bottom of today. President Yoon Yeol and this whole martial law thing that, well, didn't last very long.
Right.
So we've got 3 articles we're going to look at. One from NDTV, one from the Indian Express, and then one from Al Jazeera. Each one kind of looks at this from a slightly different angle.
Yeah, I think what we're really looking at here is, a political system that's kind of been, I guess, thrown into this, like, high alert situation.
Right.
And everyone's trying to figure out, like, what does this actually mean? What does this mean for South Korea going forward?
Yeah, exactly. So let's go back to December 2nd. It's late at night. President Yoon gives this televised address. I mean, the sources we're looking at, they're like dramatic,
Yeah.
shocking. Like, what was it about this speech that was so, I don't know, explosive?
Well, so Yoon declares a state of emergency.
Right.
And then on top of that, he imposes martial law. This is a really big deal. I mean, the last time South Korea saw anything like this was back in 1980. It's not something that, any leader takes lightly.
No.
This is a pretty big deal.
So what was it? Was there something big that happened? Something that triggered this? Or had this been brewing for a while?
So Yoon's talking about North Korea, right? Like the constant threat from the North, the need to protect South Korea's democracy. But then he makes this, like, sharp turn.
Okay, yeah, this is where it gets interesting. So it's not just outside threats. He's pointing the finger at his political rivals, the Democratic Party.
Yeah, the NDTV article actually lists out all these accusations, right?
Okay.
Like, he's accusing them of, essentially paralyzing the government. He even suggests they sympathize with North Korea.
Wow.
And that they're basically obstructing, his entire administration.
So hold on, he's saying there's this two-pronged threat, right? From outside, from North Korea, and then from within, like from a specific political opponent.
Exactly. And the language he uses in that speech, he's talking about eliminating anti-state elements.
Oh, wow.
It's all very pointed. He's directly linking martial law to national security, of course, but also this idea of purging these so-called threats within South Korea, namely the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
It's a power move for sure.
Yeah.
But the question is it justified? Or is it, some might say a dangerous overreach?
Right.
I mean, that's kind of the big question here.
And the sources don't shy away from the reaction to this. Like, it was intense, and what's surprising is how fast it all happened.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, South Korea's democracy, it's relatively young, but it's no pushover.
So from what I'm reading in the Indian Express, lawmakers from the opposition, they were basically like, nope, not happening.
Right.
Even with security forces right there, kind of looking over their shoulders, they held a vote and defied the martial law order.
And it wasn't just, the politicians pushing back either. The streets were filled with, like, thousands of protesters.
Yeah.
I mean, Al Jazeera even describes, soldiers trying to force their way to the National Assembly building. It was pretty tense. It was like this powder keg about to blow.
And yet, only 6 hours after that initial declaration, Yoon changes his mind, completely reverses course. Like, what happened?
Right.
Did he realize he had just gone too far?
Well, I think this is where we see how strong South Korea's democratic institutions really are.
Okay.
Despite, the president trying to, grab the reins, the legislature, the courts, and I think most importantly, the people themselves, they all push back.
Hard.
Yeah, hard. And it's a good reminder that a democracy, even when it's being challenged, like, it has ways to, to self-correct.
To kind of get back on track.
Yeah, it really kind of shows you, that people power can be a real check against when the leadership's trying to overreach.
So did things calm down then after, after he completely reversed course? Did everyone just kind of take a deep breath and go back to business as usual?
Yeah, not exactly.
Okay.
I mean, there's still a lot of political aftershocks from this,
Yeah. All the sources are talking about Yoon possibly resigning. The Democratic Party's like really going after him. They've even started impeachment proceedings.
Yeah, and to really grasp how big a deal impeachment is in South Korea, you got to understand the whole process. It's not simple. It's like a whole legal battle, right, with multiple steps.
Right.
It starts in the National Assembly. They got to vote on whether to formally accuse the president.
Right.
Then if 2/3 majority vote yes, then it goes to the Constitutional Court.
Yeah.
and they're the ones who ultimately decide whether to remove the president.
Wow.
So, I mean, Yoon's, he's facing a pretty serious uphill battle here.
And then on top of all that, you've got South Korea's main labor union. They're threatening an indefinite general strike. So it's not just politics anymore. This is like the whole country is getting pulled into this.
Yeah, I mean, a general strike, it's basically like everyone stops working.
Yeah.
Across all these different industries.
Right.
It can really, it can cripple a country's economy, right?
Yeah.
Disrupt all these important services. And it definitely sends a really strong message, like, we're not happy.
Yeah.
And in this case, it's pretty clear that, you know, the fallout from all this that Yoon did, it's far from over.
Even members of Yoon's own party, the People Power Party, they're trying to distance themselves. The NDTV article, it actually says that they called his attempt at martial law tragic. They're demanding that he be held accountable. So it's not just like his political opponents that are after him. It's coming from his own side too. Yeah,
and what's interesting to me is how this whole thing has, I guess, kind of exposed these divisions, you know,
right,
within South Korea's political system. And it makes you wonder, right, like, did Yoon totally miscalculate how people would react? You know, the public, the courts, everyone?
Yeah.
Or was this like a calculated risk?
Okay.
You know, something he thought he could pull off that just backfired.
Yeah.
And like spectacularly.
It makes you wonder, I mean, either way, it seems like a pretty big gamble, right? One that could cost him his presidency. And what about the rest of the world? Like, how's all of this playing out internationally?
Well, the global community, they were definitely paying attention.
Yeah.
I mean, the United States, right?
Yeah.
Big ally of South Korea. They've got troops stationed there.
Yeah.
And, they initially expressed grave concern, according to our sources. I mean, they've got a huge interest in South Korea being stable. And this whole, martial law thing really threw everyone off.
But then once Yoon reversed course, everyone was like, phew, okay, crisis averted.
Exactly. But both China, who are pretty close with North Korea and Russia, they both expressed some pretty serious concerns.
Really?
Yeah. China's like, be careful. But Russia actually went as far as calling the whole situation alarming.
Huh. So that brings up another question. Like, how's this whole incident going to affect South Korea's relationships with these other countries going forward? Could this, damage things? Trust, cooperation.
Yeah, that's definitely something to think about. I mean, South Korea, they've got to, walk this very fine line between all these major powers. And this whole episode, it could have some lasting effects on how they deal with each other, diplomatically speaking.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about the economic fallout from all this.
Mm-hmm.
The Al Jazeera article really digs into that. So
Right.
what do we learn?
Well, before this whole martial law thing happened, Yoon, he'd been trying to deal with this thing called the Korea discount.
The what?
The Korea discount.
Okay, so for those of us who aren't finance wizards, break that down for us. What is that?
Okay, so imagine, right, you got two companies, basically the same industry, same size, same profits. But one's, let's say, in the United States and the other's in South Korea.
Okay.
Now, for a bunch of different reasons, investors, they often see South Korean companies as, riskier. So they're not willing to pay as much for their stocks.
Ah, okay.
So that's the Korea discount, basically, right?
Yeah.
South Korean stocks, they're kind of undervalued compared to their global counterparts.
So Yoon was trying to convince investors that, South Korea is a good place for their money.
Exactly right. Safe, stable. He wanted to close that gap, that discount,
Mm-hmm.
and attract more foreign investment. But then, boom, this martial law thing
Right.
throws a wrench in the whole thing.
And the Al Jazeera article, it mentions that South Korea's stock index, the KO's SPI, it took a hit. And the South Korean one that weekend too. I mean, that makes sense. Investors, they don't like uncertainty.
Nope. It's pretty classic, really.
Yeah.
Political instability spooks the markets. But the big question is this just temporary?
Right.
Or, is this something that could have long-term effects on South Korea's economy?
Especially since they're already dealing with other issues, right? The Al Jazeera article mentions slowing demand from China, who they do a lot of trade with. And then there's the potential for new tariffs from the U.S. under the the incoming Trump administration?
Yeah, lots to worry about, right?
Yeah.
Some experts, they think that this whole martial law episode won't do any lasting damage, but it does really highlight something important.
Okay.
If South Korea wants to do well economically, they need political stability.
Right.
It's what builds trust with investors. It's what lets them, plan for the future.
Right.
But if they don't have that stability, the country risks looking unpredictable, unreliable.
So it's like all this internal political drama mixed with all these external economic pressures, and it's all happening at this like really delicate moment for South Korea.
Yeah, and this actually brings us to like the bigger picture.
Okay.
This whole thing in South Korea, it's not just an isolated incident. It's actually part of a much bigger global trend.
You're talking about like the rise of populism and how a lot of democracies are like being challenged right now all over the world.
Exactly. Think about it. We've seen leaders in other countries, right?
Mm-hmm.
They use fear, they use division, all to gain power.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's at the expense of democracy, democratic norms and institutions.
Yeah.
And in South Korea, in this case, it's almost like a microcosm of this global struggle.
But here's what I find interesting. The Al Jazeera experts, they argue that because there was such a strong pushback against martial law, that actually shows how strong South Korea's democracy is.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It shows that even when there's a direct challenge, like right from the top, the people, the lawmakers, the courts, everyone, they all stepped up. They defended their system. I mean, it's really a testament to to how resilient their democracy is, especially considering it's relatively young.
So do you think South Korea could be like a beacon of hope then in a world where, democracy's feeling kind of shaky?
Yeah, it's a really interesting argument. The Al Jazeera article, they compare South Korea to countries like Thailand.
Okay.
Where because of all the political problems, dysfunction, their economy has been stuck for a really long time.
Right.
They're basically saying that when a country's political system is always a mess, always in turmoil, it's almost impossible to create that stability, that trust that's so important for getting investors and growing the economy.
Okay, so let's rewind for a sec. Let's recap this crazy situation. We had a president, right? Not doing so hot in the polls, facing this combative opposition, and he makes this really bold move, this power play, declares martial law. He talks about threats from North Korea, but he also points the finger at his political rivals. He's basically saying they're enemies of the state.
Yeah, and then that whole gamble, it blows up in his face. It triggers this huge wave of resistance, right? Lawmakers, courts, but most importantly, the South Korean people themselves. And it forces him to back down, like within hours. But now he's got impeachment proceedings. People are calling for him to resign, and there's that threat of a nationwide general strike. It's
wild, right? I mean, all this happened in less than a week. It's like a political earthquake.
Yeah, the speed at which it all like escalated and then de-escalated. It's incredible. But here's the question, right? Did Yoon really underestimate how strong South Korea's democracy is?
Okay.
How much resolve they have. Or was this a calculated risk? A desperate attempt to grab power that just spun out of control?
I kind of think it was a miscalculation. It seems like he really overplayed his hand.
Yeah, it's really hard to say for sure. And I think it's something that historians, political scientists, they'll be debating this one for years to come.
It's crazy, right? I mean, you never really know, do you?
Nope.
Well, hey, that's what we do here on the Deep Dive, right? We take these complicated situations, things that are changing so fast, and we break them down so you can understand not just, what happened, but why it matters, like in the big picture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, this specific event, sure, it's about South Korea, but it really has some lessons for democracies everywhere.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that these democratic norms, they can be eroded.
Yeah.
Anywhere, anytime, and often in ways we don't expect.
So stepping back, right? What can we, as people who are trying to stay informed, what can we take away from this whole whirlwind in South Korea? What are the big lessons?
Well, I think for me, it comes down to staying engaged, staying informed.
Yeah.
But also, being vigilant.
Okay.
We got to be aware of the threats to democracy, right? both the ones coming from inside our own countries and the ones coming from outside.
Yeah.
And we got to be ready to defend the institutions that protect our freedoms.
It's kind of like what we were just talking about, right? With the South Korean people. Like, they didn't just sit back and let this martial law thing happen.
Exactly. They push back. And that starts with, understanding how these threats actually, how they show up, how they work, recognizing the patterns, and being able to sift through all the noise, all the information overload to figure out what's real and what's not.
Yeah, it's like we're constantly bombarded with information these days. It's hard to know what to believe. So how do we get better at that? At figuring out what's real? How do we avoid getting, sucked into all the misinformation, the propaganda?
I think it's about being critical. About the information we're taking in, questioning things, questioning assumptions, and actively looking for different perspectives. Don't just rely on one news source or one social media echo chamber.
Right.
You gotta challenge your own biases, think about different viewpoints, and do your own research.
And it's not just about being informed, right? It's about actually doing something. It's about holding our leaders accountable, demanding transparency, and just, participating in the whole democratic process at every level.
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, the strength of a democracy, it really comes from the people, from us, from being active participants. It's not a spectator sport. No. You got to pay attention. You got to participate, and you got to be willing to to defend democracy against anyone who's trying to weaken it, no matter where in the world we are.
Wow, this deep dive has been it's been really eye-opening. It's definitely given me a lot to think about, especially about how fragile democracies can be, and how important it is for us to protect them, to make them stronger.
Yeah, and remember, the learning doesn't stop here.
Right.
I encourage everyone to check out the sources we talked about, to dig a little deeper into these issues and to keep having these important conversations.
So until our next deep dive, stay curious, stay informed, and keep those critical thinking skills sharp.